Try that. No, sorry, Peter, it's no sound coming out this end. So Heidi, over to you, and then we can come back to questions shortly. Heidi kindly offered a number of slots and a number of presentations, and Heidi is, as you know, our resident HR expert who helps us through at various stages. And today you thought it would be fun to explore protocols post-Brexit and post-COVID. So over to you, Heidi.
I am sure that I did not come up with this topic, but it's one of those ones that I have done some research on to make sure that there is a lot of kind of context, because I think fundamentally we are in a situation where Brexit has happened, and we haven't really been able to kind of feel the impact of it because it's been hidden in amongst a load of COVID. And I think it's important to just reflect a little bit, get some context, and look at the infrastructure that is now going to be managing our employment law in the UK, so that we can understand the perspective on a broader level, and then kind of pull that into some specifics for us as individuals. Obviously, most of the bigger impact is larger organisations, and the majority of the calls participants today are kind of micro businesses or SMEs. So I've tried to kind of put the context in, but to look at something specific. But I think I'm going to try and get to the questions as soon as possible and discussion, so that we can have some meaningful question and answers based on what you guys are specifically facing and the challenges that you have. So I'm just going to quickly share some slides. And I'm not a big fan of too many slides, so or too many words on slides, so I'll go through these fairly quickly. But like I said, I just wanted to look at some context. So there is such a thing as the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement, which actually has been agreed, I believe, and everything's going to be in place. And I'm always nervous to say anything about Brexit and about employment law, because it seems to change quicker than I'd like to say. But in general, we will see little difference in employment law post-Brexit. And I think that's an interesting thing to kind of touch on and to discuss, because I think one of the reasons that a lot of people voted for Brexit was because of these silly European laws that we were faced with that we wanted to get rid of. And actually, the majority of them are going to remain in place. They have just been changed from EU law to UK law, and you'll see in kind of policies and procedures and contracts, they've just literally taken EU out and put UK in advance of it, and those are the main changes that we've seen for employment law post-Brexit. However, there are some policies that need to change locally in order to make sure that we are falling in line with employment law. Now I can't change my slide. There we go. So the employment legislation impact is really minimal, as I said. There's a few things that are key to kind of think about. The European Court of Justice, that's something that when we've had cases that have been particularly difficult in the UK, they've gone to Europe to have some case law rulings and to make sure that we as the UK infrastructure are still operating under the EU law. Interestingly enough, the European Court of Justice is still going to have a big impact on the way that we operate and do business in the UK, because there are broad levels of case law that will come from the European Court of Justice that will impact us locally, and UK courts and tribunals are going to have to pay attention to all of those rulings, because fundamentally our legislation is remaining the same. So again, thinking that we are going to be away from Europe and not impacted by Europe, actually fundamentally we're still going to have a very close relationship, and they're going to have a big impact on the way we operate and do business. The UK employment law changes that were made this year were slightly separate from EU. We have kind of looked at some short-term changes for the way that we operate for vulnerable workers, and looking at service and maternity benefits, and we've put kind of flexible working as a default requirement rather than a request. So there are some minor changes, but they're fundamentally just tweaks to existing European legislation. Obviously, the biggest thing that's impacted is worker mobility and the end of the free movement between the states. However, again, the UK kind of points immigration system is fairly generous towards European workers, and what we're seeing is actually there is less of a desire to travel from European countries to live and work in the UK versus it being too litigious or difficult for people to travel to the UK. So fundamentally, the rules and procedures around worker mobility are less of a deterrent than the kind of more emotional, holistic view. Employment contracts, again, fairly minimal change. There will be some elements in there that you need to change the EU to the UK if you're referencing employment legislation, but again, fairly minimal changes. And then for the larger corporations, there's a requirement to have a European Works Council, and the interesting thing is that European Works Councils will still be in place, but the UK might have to be invited to participate in those. So kind of broader context, there's very little change for employment legislation in the UK currently because of Brexit. The biggest thing is the right to work process and the right to work checks. And I think this is again, this is the one that I'm most nervous of talking about, because this is the kind of thing like furlough that I start mentioning dates and then the week later I'm completely out of date and it's all changed. So initially the 17th of May was the date that you could no longer check virtual right to work for the UK. It's changed to the 21st of June, but because a lot of businesses are doing virtual and hybrid working, I'm really interested to see how they're going to make it a mandatory requirement for you to have to physically see somebody's passport or papers in order to be able to employ them. So I'm interested to see what's happening. There's a lot of lobbying going on at the minute. However, the government or the Home Office are paying a lot more attention to right to work checks. There's been 77 fines already, and there will be a lot more post the June date. So I think it's really important, if you are employing people, you have to make sure that you're checking the right documentation in the right way in order for them to legitimately work in the UK. So leaving Brexit behind and kind of thinking about COVID, I've split this into a few buckets so that I can give some clarity on this first one of clarity. So I'm talking about how you as a business are communicating and managing your employees when it comes to clarity. I'm whistling through these because I've said some of this before, but communication, performance management, goals, expectations, policy changes, these things all need to happen in order for you to give your employees clarity and for you to manage your business in an appropriate legal fashion. COVID and Brexit, but mostly due to the changes that have happened because of the COVID situation and the way that that's impacted business operating in the UK. Specifically, sickness policies, holiday policies, return to work statements, those things need to be addressed to make sure that your employees know that if they travel abroad to a country that becomes red and they're required to quarantine, you have had that discussion in advance as to what needs to happen when they return. What will they be paid? What will be the situation? What will you expect them to do? If that is left without clarity, then there will be disputes, and you don't want to get into lengthy, costly dispute situations over something as simple as a quarantine discussion. So make sure those things are happening early. The hybrid home office working model, I think, is probably the thing that concerns me most in terms of potential dispute and issue resolution. I think that a lot of businesses are jumping into decisions. If they can work from home, they're feeling like it's the right thing and the most cost efficient thing to do to encourage people to work from home. But there are a lot of potential issues with that model, and I really hope that we don't see the kind of gender inequality, the kind of disputes that I'm expecting there to be on the basis of the way that these decisions are being made. So if you are operating or putting in place a hybrid model, make sure you have the right policies, procedures, processes in place to select people in the right way, to give appropriate feedback, to give people the right to request it and a reasonable return on why you're denying it, if that's the case. And also the other thing that concerns me is 50 to 60% of the people that are choosing to work from home are female. And the opposite is that the males are returning to the office. So that just is breeding a whole load of concern for me in terms of diversification of thought, but diversity and discrimination and all of those other bits. So I think making sure you're really purposeful on how you manage that is key. Then the connection piece. If people are working disparately or differently, you need to be purposeful in making sure that there is an opportunity for people to connect with each other and the customer still. Salespeople have been benched for a long time. They haven't been out doing what they would love to do. And actually that's had, people have been confident over Zoom for a while, but actually that's not a long-term solution. So be purposeful in your connection plans. The other thing is collaboration. I'm going for all the C's to try and make it memorable. Innovation isn't at its best when you're sat in your bedroom on your own for days on end. It's not necessarily the best environment for creating and defining new ways to work. So again, being purposeful with your opportunity for collaboration, bringing people together, making sure that there is the opportunity to create things. It could be virtually or it could be in real life, but there are lots of pieces of technology available, but there's nothing that beats a group of people in a room working together. And then culture, I think, is another thing kind of very important coming out of the COVID situation. Is how do you want to treat your people? How do you want to work with your customers? And what do you want people to be saying about you? If you aren't asking yourself those questions about your business and how you're operating, then you're probably not taking your culture seriously. And culture is the number one reason why people are choosing or not choosing to work in an environment these days. There was the impression that the market would be very employer driven post-COVID, and that there'd be 100 candidates for every role and you'd be able to pick whatever you wanted out of the situation. And that is not the case. It's actually the opposite. The employee or potential employee is driving the market as we stand. And if you are not attracting people in the right way and offering the kind of thing that people are looking for, then you're going to struggle to recruit for your positions. So creating something that's worthwhile for people to apply for is something that I would recommend. Then if we think about the things that kind of are common across both, I've just got 2 more slides, sorry, and I'll get back to conversation. So common HR issues that are coming out of both situations. One is workforce forecasting, workforce planning. There are a significant number of vacancies open in the UK, and there are a significant number of people that are unemployed, but for some reason those things are not matching particularly well. So you've got this is data that I found on the CIPD website recently. So they've done a piece of research on the impact of migration. So 1.3 million people left the UK. 887 of those were migrant workers. But then 700,000 people have come from other countries outside of Europe to the UK in this last COVID year. But we're left with 187,000 workers less. However, these are in the unskilled labour force. So you're kind of seeing a large number of people that are no longer in the UK able to work, generally in manufacturing, hospitality and construction, in the European low-skilled migrant workers group. But also we've got a large portion of people that we talked about earlier that are held in furlough status, and at some point we're going to have to address that issue and look at where those resources are going to be used and utilised. So looking at planning and forecasting our workforce is really key. The skills gap, kind of to develop that further. 4,000 unemployed across our region. Over the last year, there's been 2,500 roles. We've got probably, I think, from the last data I saw, there was like 700 active positions this last month, kind of New Forest to Bournemouth region. And the message from everybody is that we can't find applicants to fill them. So there are a lot of people unemployed, but there are a lot of positions, and there aren't the relationship between those two. I think training, development, and supporting employees to be developed is going to be key. And we need to rebalance this kind of situation where bigger companies are paying for funding and training and smaller companies are not. And it's the smaller companies that are facing the biggest skills gap. So there has to be something done in that arena. And upskilling, I think, is going to be the answer. Most SMEs don't have the opportunity to upskill their employee population because they either don't have the time because they're a small business and they're multitasking, or they don't have the resources or the money. So I think looking at that upskilling agenda is going to be really key to support the issues. So it's whistle stop. I really wanted to just kind of give some context, and I've spoken a lot, but there's a lot to consider. Fundamentally, most of the laws are not changing. The biggest issue that I'm seeing post-Brexit and post-COVID is a skills gap. The biggest thing that I'm seeing employers struggle with is finding the right resources to fill those positions and then being able to provide the kind of training and support for them. So if we think about locally how we can solve that and the issues that we have locally, then I think we'll have to try and address this on a very micro level. I don't think this is going to be a country solution. I don't think the government are going to solve this problem for us. I think we're going to have to take some action locally to see what we can do to address some skills gaps, and see what we can do in terms of using the resources that are available to upskill our local employee population or potential employee population. So apologies for whistle stop, but I wanted to get the boring bit out of the way so that I could answer some questions and help you specifically for your own businesses.
Great, thanks a lot, Heidi, as always, and lots and lots of things to think about. Lots of different perspectives on the call. Some are employees, some are directors, which are also employees. Some are in small businesses, some are in slightly bigger businesses. So if you do have any perspectives on things, but I think this issue of the number of people in the job market locally is clearly a big problem. But I speak weekly to the local job centre managers, and they're just frustrated. There's a whole cohort of young people, particularly who could take part in Kickstart, particularly in the sort of New Milton area, and they're just not responding to anything. And part of the problem that these work coaches are having at the job centres, in the old days, you used to have to go in and see your work coach, who kind of metaphorically slapped you around a bit if you didn't make any effort. And it's all on Zoom now. So without in any way generalising, but the young people of today aren't what they used to be. And so there is a problem with that. And there are all these Kickstart positions out there and no applicants, let alone any other jobs. So we've got to motivate people to get off the couch and back to work, and that is a bit of an issue. So any other thoughts, questions, whether it be around HR or a particular thing, what's happening coming out of COVID or Brexit in your business, or indeed if you've got anything else you just want to catch Heidi out on?
I'd be really interested to hear how many open positions people have on the call, if they have any, if there's anybody that's struggling to fill roles at the moment.
Yeah,
go for it, Chris. Sorry, it just froze a bit, Chris, but I think you're on again now.
Hi there. Oh, yes. With our industry, podiatry, it's quite a niche area, and there's a definite shortage of available podiatrists. We certainly have, across both of our clinics, two vacancies available, and we've reached out to the university course lecturers throughout the summer. We've talked to the recruiters, and we've sort of gone on above and beyond on the job spec. But it does seem to be a real issue, actually, drawing people in. And when we have talked to graduates, or they expect to be doing sort of fairly high level podiatry within 12 months. And then some of the mid 20s to early 30s or after, certainly after COVID, really just want to go down to a 4-day week, a 3-day week. So it certainly keeps us. I spend a lot more time on HR than I really want to be. I think, in short.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point, because there's two things there that I'm seeing quite a lot across many industries. It's that there is an expectation of development that's unrealistic for those of our generation. We used to very much feel that there was a lot more length of service that was needed in order to be able to progress, but there was definitely an expectation of quicker progression and an expectation of development in a way that's never been there before. So I think that's something that businesses have to really think about, how you're going to continue that development. If you can't provide the career progression, what else can you provide that would be the culturally attractive thing for that generation? And then the other thing is that flexibility in terms of how and when you work, but without there being a reduction in salary, which is the other thing that I'm finding quite a lot. I want that kind of money, but I want to work 4 days. And that conversation is actually quite a challenging one, because they know that you don't have the plethora of candidates to choose from. So people are being much more confident in demanding and asking for exactly what they want out of the situation, which again is something I think our generations will probably feel even more challenged with, because I don't know about the rest of the people on the call, but I've always struggled to ask for my own pay. I can argue for other people, but when it comes to myself, I've always felt quite uncomfortable demanding a salary, and you don't expect, you request, and so there's a definite shift in how people are communicating with businesses, and that culture thing is really key as well. So yeah, I don't know if anyone else has faced that challenge.
It's an interesting point, Heidi, about culture and so on. And if we were able to move to a system where people knew what people were worth, but also were able to be much more upfront and honest about it, we're just so secretive about what people are paid in this country. And so, yeah, we ask people what they're currently on, but the problem is in housekeeping, and Caroline's going to faint at this, but it's anything from the minimum wage to there are competitors of mine offering £15 an hour. So you've got quite a big, and a big, such a big range, and nothing ever sort of settles down. Now, of course, the market will always drive that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's just there just needs to be some more openness and discussion about what people are worth as part of getting people back to work.
And I think the fluctuating demand as well. So the other thing that the research showed was that the European workers were generally picked over UK workers because they would work evenings, weekends, and have their hours increased or decreased, whatever was available, and that's why that population were picked more readily, because the UK population have a very much a 9 to 5. This is my hours, and I want my free time, and kind of have a different view on how things work. And I think planning your workforce so that you have flexibility built in to it is a really, if you can do that well in advance, it will help you kind of live with this changing availability of resources. So I called it work.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, it's certainly the picture of the new culture of work. When I mentioned I had 9 staff, and I can see you all saying, well, he's only got 9 rooms at the hotel. But the point is, one of those is doing 2 days, one's doing 4, one's doing 3, one's doing 5. And that's the new pattern.
Yeah. And I called it forecasting because it used to be workforce planning. That was always the way that we used to talk about it. And that became kind of awkward and stale if I ever tried to talk to a business about that. But if you call it forecasting, it becomes much more interesting, because people are very clear what forecasting looks like when it comes to financials. And if you do the same kind of your 2-year plan for your people, and you look at what resources you need and the cost that it's going to bring in and the additional costs for having additional heads, you can plan all of that into your process as well as the financial forecasts, so that you have an ability to be flexible with the existing constraints of the workforce, which are many and varied, I think.
Yeah, so we'll go over to others. I think Alice was going to make a point earlier, but interesting comments being made in the chat about careers events, which are fine, but we actually need job fairs. We're not looking for people who want careers. We want people who want a job, and we want people who want a job today. And, you know, I had a guy walk in today, not suggested by one of my housekeepers. He walked in today, he had that job, he had the job within 20 minutes. That was interview, offer, accept. Not quite the contract, but that'll follow, because we're not hanging around. That's what the market demands. So sorry, Caroline, that was another one I couldn't send to you because I'm keeping him. So, Alice, sorry, yeah, go ahead. Alice, you were waving a hand earlier. I mean, what's the position at Holborn? You're a big employer.
It's catering staff, chefs, and sous and commis chefs we need. It's just absolutely dire. We're really, I mean, we're having to do restricted menus because we haven't got the chefs to cook the food.
Yeah.
And we're moving them round. You know, one chef starts his morning in Christchurch and then goes to Bashley and then goes to New Milton. They're running around like headless chickens. We cannot get, chef situation is dire, really dire.
Yeah.
And I was talking to my friend at Chewton Glen, and she said even they, the Chewton Glen, as you said, Matthew, are taking no qualifications, no past experience. They'll train on the job. If you walk into Chewton Glen, you'll get a job.
Yeah, which isn't necessarily a good thing, if you see what I mean.
I know,
you know, the traditional way where people learned it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, yeah, Elaine.
Yeah, it'd just be good if companies that would do a strategic review or forecasting now rather than waiting till September, because there might be these people that are sat on furlough assuming or thinking they've got their job or not even looking at anything else that could be available for the marketplace. So I just think the word needs to go out there. Let's do a review of what requirements are so that some of these people can be available for you when you need them, which is now.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Elaine. And what I worry when people talk about doing is, I haven't got time for a strategic review. I had to make a decision in 20 minutes today. There's no time for planning. You've got to move and move fast, or we couldn't have cleaned all the rooms today. And so that's just unfortunately the way it is. Sandeep and Rob, you're sort of around on the business networks and so on. Are you picking up any other sort of HR issues at the moment?
I'm certainly hearing a lot about the recruitment aspects. I actually had a question myself for Heidi, and it's about a much more kind of grassroots question, and you touched on it, Heidi, in your presentation, which was around setting the kind of terms of what happens if someone has to quarantine because that holiday that they were tempted to go on turns out to be in what became an amber or red zone. You know, you touched on this being an issue, but can I ask you what would be best practice around how one should treat a member of staff, or is that not a question that you can answer?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's typical Heidi answer. It depends. I'm training to be some form of government worker, I think, when it comes to the future. But there's a couple of things that I would suggest. First is to have the conversation in the holiday approval process. So you say, if you're going abroad, where are you going? Is it currently a red, amber, green country? So that you're really clear as to what the expectation is. And then the follow-up conversation is, if it's somebody that can work from home during quarantine, then you can say the expectation is if you turn into a red country, or if the country you're visiting turns into a red country while you're away, the expectation is that you will be quarantining at home and you will work from home until the quarantine's over, and then you'll come back to the office. So that's quite easy if they are able to work from home. If they aren't able to work from home, there are three options. You have the unpaid, you have holiday leave, or you have a mixture of the two, depending on your company policy. If they are actually sick, obviously as well, then that turns into SSP. So you can be really clear and say, if you're making a decision to go to a country that has the potential to go to red and you have to quarantine, we will, as a business, not pay you for that quarantine period. And again, if you're clear up front before they go on holiday, that's up to them to make that informed decision then. And they should be contacting you prior to the holiday booking for approval for holidays. So in theory, you shouldn't have any financial implication. if you want to allow them to use up holiday, if they've carried over holiday, it could probably do you a favour for them to take an extended block, if you can cover them in the workforce, to have holiday to cover that quarantine period, if you want them to use it up, and again if you've agreed it in advance. You could pay them to work from home, or do something incredibly nice, but I think most businesses aren't in the position to do that financially at the moment. And then if they come back and contract COVID, then SSP would kick in. So I think as long as the conversation is up front prior to them booking or going on holiday, you are clear as to what your expectation is, and therefore completely operating within the legal parameters. It gets messy when they come back and are suddenly quarantined and you haven't had that conversation, and then you could get into a dispute.
That's a really interesting point, and I hadn't thought about that holiday approval process. That's the point we need to look at. The staff, this is not in my website business, this is another organisation that I lead. The member of staff in question does a largely manual job. She's not going to be able to work from home. The holidays she's talking about taking is actually in the US, and it's many months hence. So hopefully, A, the US won't become red, and B, hopefully things will settle down by then. But there's all sorts of what ifs in what I've just said there.
Yeah.
That make it worth thinking about the approval process. So thanks very much for that, Heidi.
That's all right.
Yeah, so we'll go to Ruth.
Yeah, because following on from you, Rob, earlier last year when COVID kicked in, we amended our annual leave request form for employees to tell us exactly where they were planning to go. We would therefore say, yes, okay, it's a green country, for example, last year. But we said to everybody, and to make it fair across the board, even if you could work from home, it would be unfair for people who couldn't, that everybody would be treated the same, and you would have to use annual holiday if you had to quarantine coming back. And they were going abroad at their own risk. And we, as Heidi quite said, we made it clear from the very beginning what that would entail going forward. But we did find amending the holiday form to capture where they were going was helpful, and then we also kept an eye on it. If the status changed, we would contact the employee and say, can you confirm if you still intend to go, or do you want to cancel and reuse your holiday at another time?
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Yeah, I think again it's all about being proactive in these kind of scenarios, and making your expectation really clear, and that's the key thing, I think.
Matthew, just picking up from your question, I've heard a lot of what people have said today, echoes with me, but remember, it's not a local issue, it's not a regional issue, it's a national issue, and hospitality is the key sector for us in the New Forest, but actually it's across sectors. There's a lot of problems out there, and I know that in the Solent region, the Solent LEP are talking about retraining people who are out of work because of the Freeport. Now the Freeport will have hospitality sector as well, because there'll be an increase in those kind of things. Talking about your travel situation, well, actually, red listed countries, I mean, you won't even get past the airport. So, the restrictions are not only from this side, that country won't let you even land there. So you've got to be lunatic to do it. And it's going to cost you an arm and a leg, not just in testing, but the quarantine itself. So people have to build those kind of costs into their holiday in the first place. Yes, I get it that planning future ahead is going to be like that. But look, I go to a red listed country all the time, but I haven't been able to go since last April when I came back, and that's because I don't wish to expose myself to it. And I think employees have to think responsibly. In terms of the comments I put on the chat about education, see, the culture of an organization is originally started by the people who own it. After a while, it's the employees themselves who drive that culture of that organization. And so when I say talk about educating people right at the source, it's I think what Alice said as well in the chat. You need to go back right at the beginning to give that culture and that sort of talking to the children when they're first looking for jobs and careers and job fairs and whatever, that this is the requirement of it. Okay, I don't think that's been done for ages. That this responsibility that they take on when they go into employment. And it's the kind of conversations I have all the time in the different schools and work I do. We need to get that message across. It's not going there.
I think there's a really big difference in the message. When I was at school, the lucky few had a career and the majority had a job. Whereas now it's everybody needs a career path, and you're going to go and do these amazing things. And actually that's a great aspirational thing, and everyone needs to go to university, and everything that wasn't a university became a university so that everyone could go to university, and there was all this wonderful stuff. But actually I was talking with the head of Dorset LEP today, and I was saying the things that I miss in the network at the minute, based on the gaps in the skills, are the internships, the co-op programs, the kind of day release training, practical training things, the careers advice that said, graft first, plan later for your bigger career, and all of these things that we kind of, the sandwich courses, all this stuff that we had when we were younger, that gave you that mixture of work-related experience and education, so that you could build a career, but you had to work and graft for it over a longer period of time. Mm-hmm. That's very different now. So I think we have to adjust how we're expecting people to perform and to join us, so that we can offer something that meets their demands and their needs, but still fulfills our kind of graft element that is missing a little bit, I think.
The other thing, Heidi, is that the actual schools now can't afford any careers advisors. They haven't got them because it has to come out of budget. So half the problem, when I went to school, our career advisor knew what every number of the school year was going to do. He knew everybody had a job or they were going to further education. Now that doesn't happen because there's just no budget for the schools. So it's, not the youngsters' fault in some way that they haven't really got any direction. It's a shame, isn't it?
Yeah,
sorry, go on, you go, Heidi.
I was going to say, I volunteered for Young Enterprise to go into school and do employability skills to try and kind of fill some of that gap. But there was maybe one person a session that we'd influenced, because the rest were going to be vloggers or something. And I was like, I don't even know. Yeah. I'm so old.
I think to the degree Elaine is correct. But, at the schools that I'm involved in, they actually have a careers department and their careers lead and a careers advisor. And there is an actual plan, not to perhaps the same practical levels that we used to, perhaps, Elaine, but that's why I'm going in, because I'm a careers link governor at Highcliffe School. But then I give the careers advice at a school in Southampton. And what I do is introduce the employers and get employers to go and do the jobs fair or careers fairs through my network of contacts. And I think that's where the practical help be businesses can actually help each other.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Any other concluding points? We've got time for a couple more. Any other thoughts around HR? I don't think Heidi's had a difficult question yet. Excellent.
I can hear birds. Is that like tumbleweed?
Go on. I'll try a HR question then.
Go for it, Ruth.
Oh,
why not? No, you might tell us. We have utilised the furlough scheme for our port operatives departments, where we call them general terminal operatives, or people might know them as stevedores. So we're using flexi furlough. And we've realised a number of employees, we've told them if they need to book holiday and take specific time off, they should put in a holiday form. Otherwise, as far as we're concerned, they're available to work and we can pull them in any time. We've obviously realised a number of employees, because they're on furlough at home, are actually utilising it as holiday. And we've had to call a couple of employees in to speak to them about not booking holiday. How do you treat that? I mean, I think it's a bit extreme if we say it's a fraudulent activity, but we are giving them a talking to about how they're doing it, because we're being generous and we are actually topping up the furlough scheme to 100% as a salary as well. And we just feel like now, basically, my words, they're taking the mickey.
Yeah, I would maybe. There's a couple of things. You could address that as a disciplinary issue, but I guess the more kind of proactive, positive thing to do would be to give them a set amount of holiday that they need to use up before September.
We have done that.
All of it. And then say, you've got this period, we're using this, you need to use your holiday. And then when we come to the end of the furlough period, we expect you to work 100% of the time. I think something like that might be a softer way of having the same conversation. But fundamentally, what if they are abroad and not available to work within 24 hours, or if they are away and not able to work within the 24-hour notice, then that is a disciplinary issue. So it depends how tough you want to be about it.
Yeah, oh, that's fair enough. We are taking it one step at a time. We're trying to keep it on a friendly basis, and we have done what you said initially. When the furlough scheme was supposed to end, I think it was end of April, wasn't it? We asked them to take 1 week holiday within the first part of that year, the first quarter, and then when it got extended to September, we then said you need to take a further 2 weeks from that period. So we have told them to do that.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, there is no reason why you, as long as they've had the opportunity to rest for up to 20 days this calendar year, or they will have the opportunity to rest for up to 20 days this calendar year, and furlough does count towards rest day, there is no reason why you can't ask them to take all of their statutory holiday
within that period.
So I would use that up.
Okay, thank you.
Good. I think Alice is going to be our last word.
Yay!
I forgot what I was going to say. Oh yes, sorry, miles away then. Yeah, during my furlough experience, which was very long, Holborn made us, we had to take holiday each time we got to a quarter. We had to take holiday. We weren't allowed to carry, those who weren't on furlough were allowed to carry it forward for the first time ever into this year, but the furloughed lot certainly were not. And coming back, obviously I've had to re-sign a proper contract, and that's also been very specific about, I'm not coming back to go on holiday. Basically, it says in a nicer way. I'm entitled to holiday, but it has to be approved, and it can't be when everybody else wants it and all the rest of it. I'm not saying we're bottom of the heap, because that sounds a bit cruel, but obviously we've just had a lot of paid leave, basically, to be blunt. So to come back and book a holiday is not going to happen. And all during furlough, we were told to take holiday in steps as we were, so it was paid for, so we didn't accrue any.
Yeah.
And I thought that was perfectly reasonable. Why wouldn't you?
Well, the whole point of holiday is that you have a paid rest from work environment so that you can switch off, which is fundamentally what furlough has done. So there is no legal obligation to have additional holiday. You can get them to use it all up whilst they're using their furlough.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So don't worry, HR will be back on the agenda. 7th of July, Lizzie's going to update us on all things apprentice. There's still a lot of uncertainty and ignorance around what an apprentice is, and it could be costing you money, because there's loads of money that Lizzie's desperate to give out to people who take on an apprentice. So lots more about apprenticeships on the 7th of July. But if you want to find out more sooner, please contact Lizzie. And then Heidi is back on the 14th of July. And is going to help us develop a recruitment and retention strategy for sustainable success.
And I will be asking questions prior to that event so that I can make the whole thing tailored, if that's okay, rather than